I'm really excited about this mixer, and especially so because Kathy's here and she's someone I've really looked up to. And I want to tell you the story about the time I met Kathy. And this was in at the Vista conference in Montreal in 2013. And it was during one of those lunch breaks. And I was actually sitting next to her, and I was like, totally fangirl moment. And I actually took a picture with her, which I still have, by the way. And I was so much in awe of her. And I was shocked because she was so down to earth. And yeah, I mean, after that, I think I've just been in touch with her. And every time I meet her, I'm just more and more in awe of her because she's so down to earth, so humble, despite of everything that she's achieved. And she always takes time out to talk to you, to spend time with you. And I think her greatest quality is that. So, Kathy, I think we all want to hear about your story, how you got where you are. And of course, we all know that you're an amazing person. So, over to you.
Thank you so much, Sanja, and Happy New Year, everyone. Thank you for taking time out. Um, and let me connect straight away to that story that Sanjam was telling, because that Montreal conference was my very first Vista conference, the International Vista conference, because I missed the one the previous year that I really wanted to attend, but I couldn't for work reasons. And I ended up going to Montreal, having this amazing recognition that there is a world out there where women run a fantastic international conference for women and men, but with really interesting content and lots of women, lots and lots of peers in my industry that I didn't know about before. So I was completely in awe as well of the whole event. And then I ended up sitting next to Sanjam, and I was shocked by, that interaction was just a normal interaction for me. I was meeting somebody new. It was very interesting to learn about her. And then she was so openly um, admiring. And I was really uncomfortable with that, super uncomfortable, because I don't know how many of you struggle with the concept of being a role model. Um, it's it's something that's not natural, to me at least, because I'm thinking, well, I learn from everyone that I meet. I learn from everyone's story. I'm not special in that way. I just want to learn from everyone else. So in that sense, I think we're all primates. We're all social mammals. We observe each other. We learn from each other, and it's as interesting with whoever I meet. And so this is actually when I read the intro to this session today. I thought, oh, that sounds really interesting. If that was pretty much about anyone else, I would attend just because I could learn something from them and it might be quite interesting. And it reminded me of my very first sort of conscious aha moment in my career. And I want to take you back there. So this is like 35 years ago on a really wet, really cold January day in a small city in Germany. And there's a 17-year-old high school student who gets on a bus home from school. And for those of you that feel the story coming on, yes, I'd like to tell you about that moment in my life. And I absolutely don't want to patronize you because I know there's a script. Often people tell a story and then they take you into what they want to tell you. This isn't a script. This is just in the context of where I am today. That moment was relevant to me because I got on that bus. And at that time in my life, there was one thing that was really important for me, and that was to figure out what I wanted to do after school. And in my heart, I really wanted to, I had a number of things I just hadn't decided. There was lots of things I was interested in. I really didn't know. And my parents were absolutely adamant that I had to go to university because I was doing A levels. I wasn't sure. I actually wanted to learn a trade instead. I would have loved to be a nurse. But I wasn't sure. And my parents were pushing me and said, no, 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 you have to do the academic thing, go to university. So I thought, okay, well, what do I study? What do I do after school? And I got on that bus and sat next to a young woman who was probably my age, roughly, who I met. I knew her by sight. I'd not met her. She wasn't in my school. But, we were sort of politely friendly. And so we politely made conversation. Hi, how are you? What are you doing? Just going home from school. And she said, oh, I'm just coming back from work. I said, oh, because I knew she was my age because we'd done our driving test together. I said, "Oh, what do you do?" And she said, "Oh, it's just I'm doing an internship at the German Cancer Research Institute." And in my mind, I did a backflip and I thought, "Wow, what?" How can you at 17 be part of this prestigious, amazing? Anyway, long story short, I asked her and she said, well, my sister used to work there and it was quite interesting and I didn't know what to do. So I sent them a letter and I asked whether they could do an internship and they said yes. And at that moment, I understood that actually you could ask. You could just ask. You wouldn't lose anything by just asking. And so I did the same thing. I wrote to them. I did an internship with them. I found out that laboratory biology and medical studies weren't for me. I then worked as an auxiliary nurse because I wanted to know whether medical was for me. And I found that that wasn't for me either. I studied biology. I did um, lots of internships, lots of jobs that I would never have taken. I would have never even known how to get there if I hadn't had that meeting on the bus. And it changed my life completely. And I think that what Sanjam was describing about our lunch in Montreal, it's those moments in your life where you just meet sometimes random people, but because of their life experience, they they give you something that you can then take and incorporate into your own life. And to me, it's really been my career has been shaped by asking questions, um, asking for opportunities. So actually just trying it out. And if you get a no, then you get a no, but just asking for opportunities. And the hardest thing that I've had to really work on for a long, long, long time, and I'm still working on it, is to be myself and staying true to myself, that authenticity that you hear about so much. It's those three that are sort of the pillars. Because I went on to, well, I went on to study biology. I wanted to do plant genetics. That was my chosen field. Um, got got through halfway about through the studies in Germany, and then we had a professor who actually said, well, you're never going to be a scientist if you don't speak proper English. So I thought, well, okay, where can I learn English? Decided to do an immersion year somewhere English speaking. Ended up in Australia. Also because I asked, there were no programs at that time. I just sent letters out. And it was in those days, for those of you that don't remember, but they were typewriters. We didn't have word processors then. I'm that old. So I actually literally typed letters with carbon copy paper in between. So I didn't have to type 50 different ones. Um, and sent them to all sorts of universities and said, I'm a German student, a German biology student. Can I come for a year to immerse myself in the language, to learn the vocabulary in English? Um, and that was it. And I got loads of rejections. I got loads of just no answers at all. Lots of people just didn't actually send anything back. But I got two really crucial letters back. One of them from a Canadian university that I really, really wanted to go to, who came back and said, well, great, we would love to have you. You could come, but you've just missed the intake for our next year, which means you'd have to wait for a year before you can come in September. So this is early in the year. So I would have had to wait effectively a year and a half. And when you're 19, 20, that's like a lifetime. So that was completely impossible, but I could have done it. And the other letter came from Australia, where they basically said, yeah, we've seen your CV, you can come. The semester starts in 6 weeks. And at that point in time, I took the chance and I ended up in Australia. And it changed my career because I ended up being a marine biologist instead of a plant geneticist. And from then on, there were lots of opportunities. So I worked and I continued asking questions. I continued asking for opportunities. I worked on a fish farm. I worked as a lobster fisherman on the east coast of the US. So I did lots of things just to try them out because very often, rationally, you can't judge whether an opportunity is going to be good for you until you try it. And that was one thing that I think without that little ride on the bus, I probably wouldn't have had the courage to do that. So yeah, long story short, I ended up working as a marine biologist in Indonesia, had the misfortune that the Asian crisis in the 90s was making it really, really difficult to keep the projects running because they were funded by external, the AusAid was funding part of the project. And so I ended up back in Europe at the age of nearly 30 with, great studies, great experience, but no job. And didn't really know what to do. And a friend of mine who I met years before somewhere in the world said, well, I'm in London. I am in a flat share with four other girls, but one of them is going on tour because she was actually a musician for the London Sinfonietta. Do you want her room for the summer? So again, an opportunity where I said, yeah, sure, I'll take the room and I'll temp. Because in London, there's lots of temp agencies. And so I did probably 4 or 5 months of temping for different banks and various, again, lots of opportunities to see different environments, different things people were doing. And then I was just about to go back to Germany to actually find a real job as a research assistant somewhere at a university. And I picked up the newspaper at the airport and saw a job advert in London for a job with ITOP, the Tanker Owners Pollution Federation, who were looking for a scientist with field experience. And I just knew somehow that that was going to be my job. And I was so convinced of it that I actually turned down an offer that I got in Germany at that time just to wait to see whether ITOP would hire me. But luckily they did. And it's not that it was without stress. I was super stressed at the time. I thought, have I just thrown away the last opportunity of ever getting a job? But luckily it worked out. And I've been in London ever since. So hence the backdrop. I've been in London since 1999 and have had lots of more opportunities since then, simply for asking questions. And I think today is supposed to be a mixer, right? It's not supposed to be just about me. It's supposed to be about the things that you might be interested in. So I'm just a completely normal person who's had luck, opportunity, has had some pretty tough times. I mean, it's not always easy to follow through with, especially when you go with those gut moments where you go, well, actually, intellectually, I should take the safe route and take the job at the university as a research assistant. But my gut tells me I want that job in London that I've only just applied for, that I don't even know whether I'm going to get interviewed for. And you just have to go with that and then suck it up if it goes wrong, because sometimes it does. But so, yeah, I think courage is part of that career story that everyone should have, and trust in that you're going to see it through, even if it does go wrong occasionally. Now, Tanaz, I know you said you had some questions already. Do you want to jump straight into those?
Yes, for sure. I think you've already answered a couple of questions in your story. I'm also picking up questions from people who have submitted, but they are in the room right now. So just because they kind of shared it in advance. So we have a question from Francis Inoma, who asks if you've worked in an environment where it was racially or culturally different away from home, and how were you able to navigate the challenges that come with it?
That's a really good question. I've actually, and there is a really good example of that in my career history, because when I first worked as a marine biologist, I actually went to Indonesia, and I was a young woman, white Caucasian, never worked in a Muslim environment before. Um, and I was thrown into a mix because I was working, my assistant was a local Indonesian scientist who worked for LIPI. Um, so I thought, well, he's Indonesian, so therefore I will just take my clues from him. And then I learned over time while I was working there that actually, because he was from Java, the people that we were working with in Sulawesi, they thought he was stuck up and arrogant, and they didn't at all see eye to eye with him. So there was all sorts of intercultural stuff in the country. So in addition to the obvious, okay, it's a Muslim country, there's certain things you need to consider. I learned how to deal with how to save face, or how not to sometimes, because I made lots of mistakes. And that's the thing, how you learn. You learn from trying it out carefully and then adjusting course if it goes wrong. And it's hard, but I think the easiest way to do is to be open and to ask questions. So, for example, I have a really good friend now, Japanese lady, who I worked with, and we knew each other as colleagues, but we didn't know each other well. And then I had an opportunity to actually be with her in Japan, and we were quite. It was difficult for me because I didn't know how do I behave? How friendly can I be? How open can I be? Because they're so reserved. And so at some stage I said to her, I said, Akiko, I worry because I worry that I make mistakes in the way I behave that will offend you. And she laughed like I've never heard her laugh before. So she completely lost it. She laughed. And when she stopped laughing, she said, you know, Kathy, I'm so happy you asked this because you're a foreigner. So I'm Japanese. I expect you to make mistakes. I look for them. I find them funny. And it really taught me a lesson because before then I was completely anxious about it. And then I thought, well, actually, if she can laugh about it, so can I. So I think the cultural environments, the best thing is to be open and honest. And also, when you're on the receiving end, if somebody does something to offend, that's happened to me before. I mean, I grew up in Germany, so we have a certain way of dealing with each other. We're quite direct. There's not as bad as the Norwegians, I would say, but you can stereotype everyone. But so I'm quite a direct person. I then worked in Indonesia, so I learned how to maybe be more sensitive. But when I started working in the UK, I thought, oh, well, this should be easy. I've worked in Australia, I've worked in Indonesia, I've worked in the US, I've worked in various places in Europe. The UK is just another place in Europe. Whew, was I wrong? Oh my God. The UK is so complicated. And there's also so many unwritten rules and glass sort of walls and ceilings and things you do and things you don't do. They exist in every culture. So I think the best way is not to assume and just to go in as yourself and say, okay, what can I learn? And to be humble. And when you make mistakes, to apologize.
Right. I'm going to ask you three questions. One of them is mine. And then I'm also open. I just want to announce to the chat that please leave your questions in the chat. And if you're still here, we'll kind of bring you onto the spotlight in case you want to ask the questions directly. My first question is, you mentioned about asking, and I think that's an underrated tip for most people. And I'm wondering, so you mentioned stories about like if you asked and you got it, but what about when you ask and you don't get it? What about then?
Well, and that's an interesting one too, because I think you get information if you don't get it. And so if you ask, for an opportunity, for example, and somebody, you don't get an answer, or you get a no answer, what does it tell you? It tells you a number of things. You can assume that either they were just not interested at that particular time, you might not have fit that opportunity, they were too busy to even respond to you. So there's all sorts of different scenarios. And then depending on what you pick to be your answer, you can say, okay, does that mean that I just need to ask again? Because if they were just too busy, is it a question of saying, I go back and I say, I know what I could do for you. I think you might be very busy. Would you give me a chance? Or, in another opportunity, if somebody says no, you can ask, is it my skill set that isn't right for you? Do you think there's a cultural fit that's not right? Do I need to prove my motivation to you in some other way? So there's different ways of replying. So even a zero answer is a information, right? You can work with.
All right, sounds good. My next question is from Praise, who, so I think we have two questions that are more in like the work-life balance, that sort of segment. So Praise asks, how do you navigate the confusion that comes between choosing between two particular careers? If you
Mm,
relate to that.
that's a good one. I think it comes back to being authentic and true to yourself. It's quite often it's tricky, right? When you have two opportunities and you have to decide which one is the right one. So in my choice between biology and medicine, for example, I tested myself on the medical side. So I worked as a nurse. I did my first year of medical school in Germany to see what I would think, how it would feel. And I found working in the hospital that actually the elements that were interesting to me were more, how do I say that? I didn't think I was going to be a very compassionate doctor because I had elements where, for example, when I had to deal with very drunk people doing stupid things to themselves, I would not have any patience. I would simply say they did that to themselves. Not that I would withhold care, but I could feel in myself, I don't have that gene that you probably need to have to be a really good doctor. And I thought I could do it, but I probably wouldn't be very good at it. Whereas in biology, I've always had a link to, I want to understand how systems work, environmental things, how biological systems work. It's a natural propensity. So I think you have to, and sometimes you have to override your brain, I think, as well. There's a technique where if you have to make a choice between two things, you throw a coin and you say, heads means I take one, tails means I take the other. And then you observe yourself at the moment where the coin lands, because you say, okay, so the coin lands and it tells you it's option A. If your gut goes, no, you have your answer, right? Because quite often it's just you have to override your brain and it has to be in the moment.
Right, that's nice. Next question comes from Vijaya Lakshmi, who asks, how do you balance work life when you have a transferable job? And I assume this means transferring between different cities or.
It's really tough. Um, I don't think you can. And this is one of the things that this whole work-life balance concept, I think, is flawed. I think it's it's not feasible in a lot of jobs to do your job as well as you want to, and then balance it with having, the perfect out of work life. That it doesn't happen. At least it hasn't happened for me. I've never been able to do that. I've always taken jobs that were my life. So not all my life, but they would become part of your life, and you do them because you're passionate about them. At the same time, that doesn't mean that you should just give everything to the job. That's really important. I think that's one thing I learned the hard way, is that you need to keep your sanity and to keep being good at what you do for work. You also have to make sure that you look after the person and the individual. The thing with, I think what the question is alluding to is, if you're commuting, if you just don't have any time for yourself, that is super tough. And I think it's then a question of saying, are there elements where you can say, I'm going to take part of the commute, for example, and be mindful during that commute and not work during the commute. But it's a really tough question. I think it really depends on the individual and the situation at the time.
All right. We have another question from Dr. Diana. Dr. Diana, do you want to ask this yourself? Since you're here, I've let you unmute and then you can just ask Kathy directly.
Yes, hi, Kathy. This is the Dr. Diana from Jordan.
Hi.
Hi. As you are traveling a lot between countries, do you think was it an easy steps that you are moving from one country to another? I mean, psychological things. Was
Oh,
it
you mean,
hard for you to adapt yourself? As you said, you were in Indonesia and you were facing that culture, new culture to you. Was it easy to adapt yourself with it? If you have any new advice, especially that we have a new joiners here in the community, I would appreciate it. Thank you very much.
thank you for the question. And it's quite a tricky one. I think traveling or having working in different environments is always linked, in my mind at least, with preparation. And in my case, I'm an introvert, which means that the way I process information, I need time to reflect. I need time to assess, to weigh up options. My energy comes from that introspective time, rather than some extroverts might find the energy coming from, meeting with friends or family and being out and gaining that energy. For me, traveling, especially for work and working in different places, was always linked to being prepared in a way, because it would reduce my anxiety. So I would read, I would try and ask people questions about the situation, trying to prepare for what I might have to face. And that's, it's when you're working overseas for a longer time, it's something that's easier to do. When you're traveling a lot for work, sometimes that's not so easy to do, because you have one trip after another. And then I think there's just some elements where you have to say, these are the things that I need for myself, to stay sane, to stay whole. And for me, that was often saying to my team, for example, when I fly in somewhere, if I can possibly help it the first night, I don't want a dinner engagement that first evening. I want to, find the lay of the land, get myself ready for the next morning. So it's a little bit about setting boundaries, probably, if you're dealing with other people and the team. It's also about hygiene. It's also about saying no to some things, and about saying, this is the time I need to ring fence for myself so that I can have the strength to do my job well, or to live well. And that might be more time for myself than it might be for somebody else. Somebody else might be really quick. And they go, oh yeah, I'll just get changed and then we can jump and have another meeting. And you'd say, actually, I need that time to just take in what I've just heard, or to process what we've just done. So, I can't have another meeting right now. But it's depending on the situation you're thinking of. But traveling, and especially with the different cultural aspects, I find one of the most exciting things that I was allowed to do in my career. It's amazing how much you learn from other people. And I love that part. I really love that part. But it takes energy. And you have to have that energy. You have to give yourself the time to recover in between, which is also one of the reasons why I said at the end of last year, I would step down from the MD's position at Intertanker, because I thought, I worked for Intertanker for 15 years, and I was doing it and I was managing it, but it was getting too much. I thought, no, I need to have more time. I have more creativity. I have more things that I want to do with life. I need to change, find something else. So yeah, it's a very personal thing.
All
Does
right.
that answer the question?
Yeah, Dr. Diana
Perfect.
says it does. The next question, we actually have 3 questions in the pipeline. I'm going to call on Anna, who wants to ask her next question. So you can go ahead.
Sure, thank you. Hi, I'm Anna. Very much welcome to this community. Very glad to have you. Your story was really inspiring and very interesting. The only question I have which came to my mind is, normally when we are working in a place, we get comfortable there, right? After hard and after fitting in. So then how do you want to change over? What is the motive between changing over to another place, and how to set the mindset to move on, basically? That's what I want to hear from you, actually. If you like to.
Okay, that's interesting. I think for me, I've had in my career, I've made sort of 2 big job moves that, when I look at the corporate element of it. So I was with ITOP, that first job in London, for 10 years before I left, and then with Intertanker for 15 before I left. And I think in both cases, what happened was, as you get good at your job, as you get comfortable in your job, as you called it, you start to see patterns. You have, so you know what's coming next, in a way. You know that sometimes the content is different, but the process will be the same. So you have business cycles that you go through, you have things that you learn. And then at some stage in my life, at least, I would get to the point where I thought, okay, I've learned everything I can about this bit. Is there something else? And very often in a job, you get layers. So when I've started new jobs, it would take sometimes a year or 2 before you actually understand it properly in the context of what it does to other people, the relationships you have. But then you learn and you learn and you learn. And it's like a little bit like you're in a bowl, and you climb up the side of the bowl, and then you get to the rim of the bowl and you look out and you see that there's a whole new horizon. And then you explore that horizon and you start climbing again and again, and you get to the next level, and suddenly there's a new horizon, because you get either broader in your knowledge or you get deeper in your knowledge. But at some stage, I would then say, okay, great, I've learned everything that I want to know about this subject or this job. What else can I do? Is there somewhere else that I can bring benefit, or that I can learn more? And that's the point for me where I've said, okay, I can do this job standing on my head. They're getting benefit from me doing it. That's great. I get the satisfaction from it, but there must be more. And what is that? So that's how I've decided.
All right. The next question is actually from Sanjam. She had a question for you.
Sure.
Okay, so I know when you became the MD of Intertanko, there was a lot of attention on you And that would have come with a lot of pressure as well, right? Because people kind of were looking at you, all eyes were on you. So how did you deal with all that pressure?
Pretty badly, to be honest with you. It was super tough. I thought a number of times that I should probably leave the job. I had a lot of issues, and I don't want to talk negative about the organization, but the organization had some issues internally. So I walked into an environment where people did not welcome me necessarily because they either wanted the job for themselves or there were all sorts of reasons. It's also a very male dominated kind of environment, possibly more so than other parts of shipping still. And so it was super tough. And I think the one thing that kept me doing it was my determination not to let them tell me when to leave. I thought, no, you're not going to get me out. I'm going to leave when I'm ready and when I feel that I've done everything I can to make this a better place. And you can judge me by it. It took 15 years. No, it didn't. But it was that at the beginning. It was super tough. And I think, if I'm completely honest, I was lucky. I had some very good friends that I could share things with. And it's always tough when you're in leadership positions because there's a lot of times where you can't share with anyone, certainly not the specific challenges, because there is nobody else at your level that you can share with. That makes it extra hard. But if you have a peer group of people that have similar challenges elsewhere, the principles are often the same, and that's a good one to share. So I was lucky to find other women that had challenges that I could relate to. And I took quite a significant step, and this is a very personal thing, so I apologize for sharing, but I actually thought, I'm not centered in the job. I keep being pushed around. There's something not right in the way my self-esteem works, because my self-esteem was not strong enough to actually do the job and think, I'm comfortable. I know I'm doing a good job. I didn't have that. So I did a regression. I actually went and took myself to a retreat for 10 days, cut myself off from the world with, no contact at all, no media at all, and worked through my issues and found a much more authentic way of being. But it was really hard work, but it benefited me ever since. So that was probably 11 or 12 years ago now. Taking that step, and it was interesting because I talked to my GP about it at the time, and she said, well, if I assessed you, I could declare you as clinically depressed right now because you're so stressed. You could be on medication. I said, well, I don't want that. And she said, yeah, I know that. I said, well, how about I do this regression and work through some issues of not feeling, the imposter syndrome, not feeling up to it, thinking I'm doing a bad job. How do I work through that? And she said, well, you can do a regression, but it's risky because it can debase your entire personality that you've built for yourself since being a child. And I thought, well, I've got nothing to lose. I would try this. And I did, and it worked in the sense that since then, I think I've been much more able to take things on the chin and say, well, I'm not good at a lot of things. There's a lot of things I don't know about. That doesn't make me a worse person. I try my best always, and my best is what I can give. I can't go beyond that. So if it's not good enough for some people, they will be critical. So that's their issue, not my issue. Has it taken away imposter syndrome? Absolutely not. Has it taken away self-criticism? No, absolutely not. And I think those are parts of our personalities that make us better because they keep us striving to learn more, to be better, to polish how we do things, to be humble. So yeah, does that answer? Okay.
All right. The next question we actually have it from someone named Pranjali, who is not from the maritime industry, but she's heard stories from her father being a captain, and she's a neuroscientist by training. She's wondering if you see any space for her with the skills in the maritime industry.
For what skills?
As a neuroscientist.
Oh, a neuroscientist. I'm pretty sure there are, because, and this is the amazing thing about maritime. I know so many people in maritime that never set out to be in maritime. They didn't study anything to do with maritime. They kind of came into the industry through links they made or jobs that they advertised somewhere, and they've added to the industry. So if I'm thinking a neuroscientist, yeah, I think you could probably find areas where you're working with crew, because there's a lot of psychology on board ship. There's a lot of psychology with new technologies coming. There's a lot of threats, psychological threats to the existence of people working in maritime. We've got apps for everything nowadays. So yeah, absolutely. I think there's opportunities, and it depends. I mean, if she wants to work with people on the clinical side, I know that there are people that are doing a lot of great work with helping people to study as well, staying on top of everything changing. So yeah, definitely.
All right. We have another question from Lopa. She says, in a relationship-driven industry like maritime, there's often a fine line between being flexible enough to learn from others and firm enough to stand by what you know and what you believe. From your experience, what should one consider most carefully when deciding where to draw that line?
That's a really good one. And it's absolutely right. I think that is a very good insight. I think it's always dependent on the situation. There is no hard and fast rule on that. But I think the one thing that I've always gone by that's worked for me is it has to be congruous with who I am. So my values have to be considered in that. And so, for example, trying to think of a good example. So, for example, if I witness, and this has happened to me, I witness somebody talking in a way that was derogatory about somebody else because of their culture. And I thought, I have nothing to do with the conversation, but this upsets me because this is not okay. So I got involved and I joined the conversation and I explained why I didn't think that was right and why generalizing like that wasn't acceptable, etc., etc. So I think it's that you have to stay true to your own values. You have to know, does it feel right for you to stand up strong, or is it something where you can say, you have to win the war. You cannot win every battle. Sometimes it's okay to just let it go and say, okay, never mind. But it has to be right with your what you believe in.
All right. I see Pranjali has her hand up, so I'll just go ahead.
Hi, Tanaj. Thank you. Katharina, thank you very much for sharing your experiences so far. It's quite enriching. And hello from Germany, since you said that you're from Germany originally. That's where I'm based for the past couple of years. Tanaj, she should have highlighted a part of my question, but I'm a neuroscientist by training, and I've been on the business side of things for a couple of years now. But I'm still a little bit apprehensive to see if I've been in academia for so long, and after making a shift to sales strategy and business development, because my father was in the merchant navy for a really long time, that's how I've grown up. I think I know a lot about the shipping industry than a scientist should. There's really some technical terms that I know, and I've grown to have an interest in this field, but I'm not really sure if my skills will be valued here or useful here. So that's what I would like to ask you.
If I would come back to what I said at the beginning, the best way to do it is to ask. Find some companies that are doing things that you might be interested in and write to them or get in touch with them and say, do you have anything for me? This is what I could imagine doing, or I've seen your work and this is an interesting aspect. What do you think about this? Or there's so many elements where you can engage. And ultimately, I would say just don't wait for it to come to you. Go and get it.
All right. We do have around 15 minutes. We usually keep this time to open this up for a breakout room where people are mixed in groups of threes or fours and people can kind of connect with each other. I just want to take a quick poll with the audience in terms of Do we use the next 15 minutes to talk more to Kathy, or would you want to move on to the networking round where Kathy may be in one of the rooms? In the meanwhile, maybe I'll ask Sanjam if she has any other questions or if any.
Oh, I think Kathy, you could share things about the fact that you can wear an Indian sari and that you make your own garam masala. And oh, I see a hand up. I see someone with their hand up.
Yeah, one second. We have Kalpana who has a question.
Yes.
Thank you, Tenaz. It's so wonderful to connect with the global sisters from all over the world. My question to the Kathy, you have shared your experience and it's really inspiring for all of us. But during your journey, do you face any kind of the work harassment or some sexual harassment problem? If so, how you dealt with that? I think this is very important for all the women who are sitting here.
Yeah,
Thank you.
and that's a very good question. So if I go back in my career before Maritime, when I was a nurse, I did indeed have some, yeah, don't want to call it sexual harassment issue. I want to call it a cultural misunderstanding issue. I was a nurse. I worked with a young surgeon from a different country. We worked really well together. In a team, of course, you always work in a team with surgeons and lots of other nurses. And he was always very helpful. He helped us learn sutures and things, not just me, the other young nurses as well. So it was great. And then he offered to show me a special type of knot or suture. I can't quite remember the difference. But he didn't have the special needle holder with him. And would I come with him and he would show me how to do it? And he was working in the hospital, and they had staff accommodation on site. So his room was not far. I followed him to the room, and clearly his intentions were not to show me a knot of that sort. He wanted to show me another knot, including my body as well. So I was completely shocked. He was not in any way violent, but he clearly had an expectation, because I'd been friendly, that I wanted what he wanted. And I had to very quickly save face for both of us, deal with the situation in a way that got me out of trouble, out of danger, but in a keeping the ability to work with him, because I didn't want to ruin his career or mine, because I thought it's a misunderstanding. We managed to do that. I then found some different shifts and managed to find a way of avoiding the situation in the future, and it was fine. It wasn't a problem. So I was lucky. And I know that there are many women that have problems that are not that easy to avoid. But I think in my experience since then, I've had very heightened senses for this kind of thing. So I'm constantly scanning, is my behavior creating a situation that somebody might misunderstand, misinterpret? I know that that's not necessarily my fault, somebody misinterpreting, but I act very early. So I will, if I see any sense of somebody being too familiar, too friendly, I will make sure that I send a very clear message. Whether that is I start talking about my husband, I'm not married, but I have a partner for many years, or I make it very clear that I talk about their family situation. If I know that they're married, for example, I ask about their children. So I find ways of trying to diffuse anything like that. And luckily enough for me, I've never had to deal with an actual harassment situation. I've had over the years always situations where you feel something is off, something might go in that direction, but I anticipate that early, and I avoid it. I try and diffuse it very early on. And I think there is always, in my mind, there's a need for very good systems to support women, not just women, because I think ultimately sexual harassment is about power. It's not about gender. And men get harassed in the same way by women or men, when there's a power differential that's very strong. And I think it's that power differential that we need to address. And that's where the support structures need to act, they need to work. Because if we don't have the support structures where somebody that doesn't have power can find help or support, then they're doomed. Then they can't really avoid that. So it's a tricky one. But I think very often we can avoid many situations that could turn into sexual harassment by being clear, open, very early on. And I think that's pretty much all I can say at this point.
We have around, I'm going to say 5 to 10 minutes and we have 3 questions on the way. So I'm wondering how many I can ask you for you to answer in 10 minutes. So I will just maybe if you could like keep it quick in your responses. So I'm not going to call up anyone else on screen. I'm just going to read out their questions. Esther asks, as a seafarer, I used to think women who worked ashore had it easier compared to those who worked on board in terms of integrating into the workforce. But from her experience, the situations are the same for all women. As an amateur maritime professional, I would like to find out from her if she has experienced massive change when it comes to men in the industry being receptive of women in the industry.
Say that again, sorry. The question is,
have you noticed a change in men being receptive towards women in the industry?
Okay. Good question. I think this is, unfortunately, this is one of those questions that generalizes a lot. Has there been a change in attitude? I think in many cases, yes. There's certainly been a change in awareness because we're doing much more to talk about, people being aware what is okay, what isn't okay. Has there been a real change in attitude? It's debatable, but I think we just need to keep pushing through it, and we need to, I think we need to not make it about gender all the time. We need to make it about hierarchies and power, because very often it's about, to give women a chance in the industry, we need to bring women with us. We need to put down our hand and pull them up the ladder with us. And sometimes I see that that's not happening enough. So I think it's actually incumbent on all of us to change the whole industry. The industry is still a male-dominated industry, but that's also a numbers game. It's just that there haven't been enough women coming up the ranks wanting to stay the course. And it's not an easy one to recommend to somebody to do, because it can be really tiring if you have to deal with the same crap day in, day out. If you just because you're a woman, you're assumed to be weaker or less able. It gets tiring after a while, and some women will basically just say, I'll find myself another industry where I'm valued for who I am as a person rather than my gender. But I think for those of us that are in the industry, we just need to keep pushing.
Right. The final question that we will take, actually, one final question and then one sort of wrap-up question. The final question is, what is one thing about your work that motivates you and drives you to keep going? This is from Saleha.
What motivates me is always to make a difference. So when I can see that what I do it makes a difference to other people, makes a situation better, improves things. That's what motivates me. And I think sometimes to a fault, because a good friend of mine keeps talking about oldest daughter syndrome. She has a theory that being the eldest in a family means that you take more responsibility for things, even though they're maybe not yours to take responsibility for. But I think that certainly applies to me. And I kind of try and monitor myself and think, do I really need to get engaged here? Is this something that I should be doing? But if it needs doing, I'll do it. This is sort of it's a personality thing. But yeah, I'm motivated by making things better, more efficient, cleaner, whatever it might be.
Right. And the wrap-up question that we have is like, are you open to taking on mentees, and how does anyone sign up for that process?
Oh, that's a nice question. Thank you so much. And actually, I've had that question a number of times, and I've never said yes in that sense, because I'll come back to what I said at the beginning. I think we all learn from each other. And I've never seen myself as a mentor. I consider myself, I'm very happy to share my experience, but being a mentor puts you in a position where it's quite a responsible situation to be in. So if I were to say I sign up for this, I would want to know that I have the time to do it well. And this has been one of the difficulties, because while I was working for Intertanko, I was so busy, I couldn't really say I would take time out to mentor somebody in a formal kind of way. And I think at the moment for me, it's I'm taking some time now after finishing with Intertanko to figure out what I want to do next. So for the next 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 months, I'll probably not be active in the industry, just to figure out what do I need to do to make a difference going forward? Where's my next career path going? So I don't think I could commit to being a formal mentor, but I'm always happy to talk to people. And as Sanjam said, I mean, if somebody wants to ask me a question, they can just send me a message on LinkedIn or by email, and I'll try and do the best I can. But being a formal mentor, I think, would mean taking an interest in their career path and really going quite deep. And I don't think at the moment I have the time for that.
I think